Hello, everyone. My name is Spencer Walsh. Welcome to today's show. Thank you so much for joining us here on this Wednesday episode of your Newsflash. First, we talk about the continuing war on Gaza. Day 110 in the books as Israeli forces have encircled Khan Younis, as Gazans are now really getting in that dangerous famine neighborhood here. Also, some pretty shocking comments about some of the really tough losses that Israel has taken. This is to the New York Times. Some of the commanders talking to the New York Times, really admitting that this is commanders of the Israeli army admitting that Israel has not had things go for them as well as they may have wanted. And we'll talk about one particular incident that happened over the last few days that would exemplify that really was not picked up on that much in mainstream media. Also, and just, kind of the general kind of perspective of Gaza there. But first, we really have to talk about this stuff going on in the Supreme Court. And with Greg Abbott along the border with Texas, it really could be a pretty crazy situation. A lot of things seem like they could interrupt into crazy situations, but this one especially has some interesting echoes in our history for sure. And that is, I don't know if anyone's been following this, but it has been a battle essentially over immigration. Where a Supreme Court ruling granted the U.S. border agents the ability to remove razor wire from the top of Texas's border wall, but said nothing about preventing it from being laid. So apparently they are essentially just trying to really skirt the rules and skirt the, what the Supreme Court is trying to say, and essentially, just prove to their base. Greg Abbott is essentially trying to prove to his base in Texas. I don't think he's going to make a presidential run anytime soon, but so this is purely Texas politics here. Is trying to prove that he is strong, he is taking on Biden, and he is showing his base that he could be tough on the border, even as migrants come from some of the worst situations in the world, risking their lives trying to find work in America, and then it's just really risk death crossing the Rio Grande, and risk death in so many other thousands of ways. And of course, this barbed wire has been put up. So Texas Governor Greg Abbott, he broke with the Supreme Court on Wednesday. Really, there is some definitely some parallels in American history. With the one of them being the Trail of Tears, the other one being the lead into the Civil War with the nullification crisis. John C. Calhoun, you can look that up. Just blatant disregard of the federal government is really when things start to go downhill, shall we say. So Texas Governor Greg Abbott broke with the Supreme Court on Wednesday, using a loophole in its recent ruling to use razor wire at the border wall, escalating his ongoing feud with the Biden administration. So on Monday, a 5-4 Supreme Court ruling granted U.S. border agents the ability to remove razor wire from the top of Texas's border wall, but said nothing about preventing Abbott from instructing the Texas National Guard to continue laying it. On Wednesday, Abbott posted a statement on X which said the federal government had failed to protect Texas from invasion, as it set out in Article 4 of the Section 4 of the Constitution. He wrote that Biden had ignored Texas's demand that he perform his constitutional duties and invoked Texas's constitutional authority to defend and protect itself. According to Abbott, this authority supersedes any federal statutes to the contrary, because it's the goddamn Constitution, right? So it's just you could hear the Texas, the inner Texas, in me here coming out. But no, I'm not from Texas. Just getting into my inner Texas. We all Americans have. But according to Abbott, this again supersedes any federal statutes to the contrary. Meanwhile, Joaquin Castro, Democrat of Texas, posted on X calling for Biden to take control of the Texas National Guard. Governor Abbott is using the Texas National Guard to obstruct and create chaos at the border. So really the latest escalation and ongoing battle between the state and federal governments in Texas. Earlier this month, members of the Texas National Guard blocked access to a public park from Border Patrol officials. Probably, if you go through and look at the phone histories of the Texas National Guard, that has got to be one of the most in terms of their internal group chats and things like that, and what they talk about on break. And it's probably got to be one of the most racist policing and law enforcement and just hateful, vile, groups of people ostensibly in law enforcement in the entire country. And believe me, that is saying something. We've seen Border Patrol, we've seen what federal Border Patrol agents talk about, how they talk about migrants. That stuff has been leaked out before. But, imagine the people that that are so bad that the Border Patrol is being brought in to stop them. And the Border Patrol probably also relatively sympathetic to, the Texas National Guard people as well. Yeah, so it essentially, again, it's setting up all here on this, using razor wire at the border wall. They wanted to put it to make it just that much tougher. It says you're at your last step, and then you can't just, get past this wall to get into the country. And again, it just comes from this great replacement kind of mythos that has been permeating throughout pretty much the entire right wing at this point, that every single person coming, like they can see, a bunch of, destitute, whether it be men, women, and children, whether it be, 50% men, 50% women, whether it be any proportion of people, essentially, huddled under a bridge, and clearly the most, destitute situation, they will get it into. And by the way, this comes from some of the most openly racist propaganda and books that have been kind of out of the political discussion for years, but and for decades prior, but have been slowly throughout, the Trump administration and up until today, have been working their way back into the public discourse about, it all kind of stems from this book called Camp of the Saints, which is a book where, I think it's like centers around like the main white characters are in Gracie Mansion or something in New York City. And there's just this massive just invasion of hordes of people, from Africa or something like racist shit like that, and that is the whole process of the book. And stemming from that comes the great replacement theory that these people are coming in to replace white people, to invade, all of that stuff. It's just absolutely, ridiculous, especially because you come, especially from kind of someone in America who's currently, studying abroad, like a main reason why people think that America is so great from abroad, like even people who are in countries that have absolutely been totally screwed up like this, by us, objectively by us, they look at America and be like, okay, America is, the greatest country in the world. A place like, for example, like Syria, for example, they're like, okay, especially some of the Syrians I've talked to in London are like, America's the greatest country because they accept everybody, because they are willing to take in all ideas and use them, take some of the smartest, most brilliant people in the world and use that to their advantage. And, it's just these people who at some point or another came in through immigration. At some point, their parents or grandparents or ancestors arrived on these shores to, start a new life. And, they obviously have this mindset of pulling the drawbridge up, but they also have this, deep fear of especially people who are brown, especially people who are, coming from, the South, or people who are essentially not coming from Europe, as, just these hordes of invaders. It's incredibly sinister. It goes back to, I've been looking at, I spend way too much time on Twitter, and I've seen over the past few weeks these videos of people being like, what does this look like to you? This is, if there's some military age men amassing at our borders, this is an invasion. It is like the amount of paranoia, the amount of just general, baseline level of fear of other people that you have to have in your life to come to that conclusion, when it's just the most, they have, only the clothes on their backs, and they're huddled under this bridge. They're just like, freezing cold. They have no guarantee of absolutely anything in life. And like idiots, just subhuman people are sitting in, their McMansion somewhere in a suburb and think that those people are coming to invade. When, if you actually take 2 seconds and talk to them They're just like, yeah, I just want to achieve the American dream. I just want to find a place where I can get a job and send money back to my damn family. Like, it is just so sad to think about. Of course, it's always been that way. If you look at through history, there's always been these sects of people, throughout American history that have been, we got to pull the drawbridge up. We got to, these people are coming in to ruin our society, ruin our way of life. And it is just especially in a country like America, it is so short-sighted. And with somebody like, Donald Trump being allowed to, let through the gates by the Democratic Party, administration and their criminally negligent, campaign they run in their, kind of support of Joe Biden. I mean, it is this stuff being allowed to happen, but it's not just Donald Trump. It is far from Donald Trump. This movement was not created by Trump. It was kind of mainstreamed by, the Trump movement in general, but, Trump is not a part of the story. This is Greg Abbott. This is Texas. This is a deep culture of fear and hate that is spreading throughout the entire country. It is just absolutely horrific to see. And also, just the whole angle of just completely ignoring federal authority is also incredibly disturbing because, fun fact, this is some of the precursor to some of the worst things that have ever happened in American history happened when, federal authority is just ignored in a way to discriminate against minorities in some sort of way, do really awful things to minorities. So this is definitely a story that's not going to be going away anytime soon. Using essentially a loophole in this razor wire at the border wall. Razor wire is back up, and they essentially the Supreme Court gave them permission to remove it by a 5-4 decision. A 5-4 decision. They were given permission to remove it, but then they didn't say. Abbott was like, they didn't say anything about putting it back up and continuing to lay it. So here, that's what happened. All right, definitely somebody to keep an eye on in the extreme. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening and supporting Newsflash. We now have a brand new way for you to be heard if you want, whether a text message or a audio message. Please, no video messages. I really just do not think that's necessary. We have a new feedback box open for you. Ladies and gentlemen, it is officially open. SWRN702@gmail.com. Send a text message, send a voice message of no more than 30 seconds via the voice memos function. Either of those two options, and we will 100%, not going to find this guarantee anywhere else. We're going to play it on the show, listen to what you have to say, and it literally could be about anything. Well, if it's inappropriate, we won't play it, but it could be about anything. Thank you so much. This is my thank you to all the listeners who have stuck out with us and want to have their own voice in the show. SWRN702@gmail.com is the address. All right. So, a lot of stuff to talk about today in the war on Gaza. Let's start off with our standard run-through of all the events. 25,700 plus Palestinians killed and 63,740 wounded on the Gaza Strip. 387 plus Palestinians killed in the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem. And Israel has revised its estimated October 7th death toll down from 1,400 to 1,147. All right. Meanwhile, the UNRWA, the United Nations Refugee Works Agency for the Palestinians, has been reporting that it is catastrophic hunger. It is famine going on at this moment. So just starvation and hunger are spreading among 500,000 Palestinians in Gaza at the moment, facing rainy, cold weather and insufficient food due to the Israeli attacks since October 7th. Some Palestinian families are using whatever ingredients they have to feed their children, such as grinding fodder, which is used for hay or straw, to bake bread. So this is normally to feed, which is hay or straw normally to feed cattle, to bake bread. So these are people, they're feeding what they would feed their cattle at this point to their children. Like this is the level of what's going on at this point. We live, and by the way, the people who had not had any access to clean water essentially for this entire time, been drinking, contaminated or salt water. We live in a polluted condition there is no fresh water, no food, no drink, no flour. This flour that you see was made from livestock fodder, he said, showing a sack of fodder that contains insects and needed palming before being crushed. Intense fighting, access denials, and restrictions, plus communications blackouts are hampering the UNRWA's ability to safely deliver aid. And also, by the way, the fact that Israel is bombing their locations, and this is, I think, is a very people have been killed. They're sheltering at the UNRWA facilities. UNRWA, again, UNRWA storage and UNRWA supply centers have been targeted by Israelis. They know that this is where these places are, and that's another one of the many things that makes this a real genocidal intent to wipe out this entire population, is because they are targeting methods of aid. They're targeting, completely civilian. And again, it's not just by accident here. There are going for these civilian places, and places like hospitals, places like UN schools, the only place where civilians can come and get aid and get any sort of sustenance, get any sort of connection to any sort of semblance of what they need to survive. And oftentimes that stuff is not there or incredibly expensive. Palestinians in Gaza have been blocked by the Israeli military from accessing agricultural fields to the east of the Gaza Strip since October, a significant portion of which have been now leveled and destroyed. Again, the only really thing that Israel is good at is just, again, destroying the native agriculture, the native crops that were there, and then, inventing really unsustainable, but on the face of it impressive, but really unsustainable, agricultural practices to make up for the fact that, throughout their existence, they have just destroyed a lot of the native environmental ecosystems of the area. The humanitarian situation in Gaza is still catastrophic. As winter sets in, people are struggling without proper shelters, food, water, and clothes. Action Aid UK appealed in a petition. Meanwhile, Israel has killed, 25,700 Palestinian martyrs and injured 63,740 Palestinians in the Gaza Strip since October 7th. In the past 24 hours, Gaza's health ministry said that Israel killed 210 Palestinians and injured 386 people. Israel has continued to kill hundreds of Palestinians each day, despite language from Israeli and U.S. governments in the mainstream media that Israel has moved to a less intense phase of the war. Again, I'm sorry, I don't care what phase it is. I don't care if you're killing 300 people one day and then 180 people the next day. That, to me, is still a pretty darn fucking intense phase of the war. The Israeli military, again, announced Tuesday it encircled Khan Younis, the second largest city in the Gaza Strip, claiming that Hamas leaders are hiding in tunnels underneath it. They were hiding under the hospital. They were hiding under the UN school. They were hiding under... First they were hiding in Gaza City. First they were hiding in like Beit Hanun or whatever. Next they'll be hiding in the fucking Sinai Peninsula when they chase the Palestinians out there. It's just like, it's just unbelievable. It's just, you need to take a step for a moment. It's just, yeah. Wafa, the Palestinian news agency, has reported that. Again, there has been a bombing of a seaside house west of Al-Mawasi, which is a area designated as safe by Israel in December, killing at least 4 people and injuring several others who were hospitalized in the Al-Najjar hospital in Rafah. Israeli forces also bombed the Harun al-Rashid Road in Khan Younis and were stationed around the Al-Aqsa University buildings. Ambulances could not reach the Al-Amal and Nasser hospitals as Israeli forces blocked all the roads leading to them. Again, it's just like there's no defense for this. There's no, it's not even being acknowledged in mainstream media. The fact that there was just regular blocking of ambulances, like lights on, going as fast as they can, and then they just meet an Israeli tank. So Palestinian rescue teams transported 20 Palestinian martyrs to the Al-Shifa hospital in northern Gaza. Israel's bombardment of West Gaza destroyed a number of houses and apartments in the area, leaving dozens of Palestinians under the rubble, Wafa said. The Al-Shifa hospital is one of 7 medical facilities operating in a limited capacity in northern Gaza. The WHO said that its teams managed to resupply 19,000 liters of fuel to Al-Shifa on Monday, which is pretty good. I think Nasser is the last kind of fully functioning hospital. Al-Shifa and some of the other ones kind of barely hang on with just aid shipments that are able to get in when they're not being targeted by Israeli forces. Wafa reported that at least 50 Palestinians were killed and 120 injured in the Israeli bombardment of Khan Younis alone in the past 24 hours. Al-Khair and Nasser hospitals are minimally operating and totally inaccessible following the Israeli siege of the city. The WHO is extremely concerned about reports of the Al-Khair Hospital, a small NGO-run hospital with around 30 beds, facing military incursions and several health workers being detained. Communication with that hospital is no longer possible, the WHO said on Wednesday. The Palestinian Red Crescent Society said that 3 people were killed in the Israeli bombardment of its offices in Khan Younis. Doctors Without Borders published an update from its team working the Nasser hospital on Tuesday evening, saying that the Israeli army ordered medical staff and patients to evacuate the area. Meanwhile, Reuters reported on Wednesday that Hamas and Israel have broadly agreed in principle during mediated talks on a month-long ceasefire in which Palestinian prisoners will be exchanged with Israeli captives held in Gaza. These reports are yet to be confirmed, while agreements regarding a permanent ceasefire remain a thorny issue for Israel, which the Hamas leadership has stipulated as a precondition for any exchange deal. It seems like a month-long ceasefire with some sort of prisoner exchange. We don't know yet. We do know the 2-month ceasefire was rejected, so we're going to have to see what kind of terms Hamas is accepting here to make this exchange. This comes after Axios reported Israel submitted a proposal, again, through Qatar and Egypt, to pause the war for 2 months in return for the release of all 130 Israeli captives in Gaza. Hamas has yet to comment on those reports. The movement made clear in the past months that it will not accept any deal without a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. So this was a kind of pretty remarkable moment this Wednesday. I don't know, Wednesday, the day Wednesday. I don't know when people will be seeing this, so I'm just going to say Wednesday, where hundreds of Israeli captives' families blocked aid convoys going to the Gaza Strip through the Karam Abu Salem crossing to choke Palestinians off from aid and put pressure on Hamas to release the Israeli captives, according to the Jerusalem Post. So again, you can see what what side Israeli society is on, what they want to achieve from this war, and how they view the Palestinians more broadly. Because again, this stuff is going to be going to the Palestinians, not going to be going to international aid as well, which is, I think, very, very telling. They won't even lift a finger because, again, they don't care about Palestinians and view them, just at least the people inside the Gaza Strip, as terrorists. Every single one of them. The Palestinian Authority's Ministry of Foreign Affairs condemned Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's attempt to prolong the war in Gaza for 6 months, as well as the rise in attacks in the West Bank. Again, more strongly worded letters from the PA. What would the Palestinians do without them? All right. Israel, is losing its war against the Palestinian resistance in Gaza, according to senior commanders that have spoken to the New York Times. After more than 100 days of war, Israel's limited progress in dismantling Hamas has raised doubts within military high command about the near-term feasibility of achieving the country's principal wartime objectives, eradicating Hamas and also liberating the Israeli hostages in Gaza. Israel has established control over a smaller part of Gaza at this point in the war than originally envisaged in the battle plans from the start of the invasion, which were reviewed by the New York Times. The Israeli military leaders admit, according to the Times, that their advances have been stymied by Hamas infrastructure that was more sophisticated than Israeli intelligence officers previously assessed. Failure on the battlefield has led Israeli commanders to conclude that the freedom of more than 100 Israeli hostages in Gaza can only be secured through diplomatic rather than military means. It's so glad that you've come to this conclusion after you've destroyed all of Gaza and killed, 30,000 plus people realistically. Many of the Israelis remaining in Gaza are, in fact, military personnel, prisoners of war, including those that were taken captive on October the 7th. The unnamed Israeli generals who spoke to the Times considered that a drawn-out battle intended to fully dismantle Hamas would most likely cost the lives of the Israeli hostages held in Gaza because, that is just the nature of the way the Israeli army, does business. They are an army that mostly kind of, leads with the airstrikes and then filters through later. And those airstrikes, especially when you're targeting areas where Hamas is, when they decide to do that once in a while, they will have, the hostages there, And that's kind of a very tough situation. It's a tough situation that Israel is in. Basically, it's a stalemate. Andreas Krieg, a lecturer at the Security Studies at King's College London, told The Times, it's not an environment where you can free hostages. If you go into the tunnels and you try to free them with special forces or whatever, you will kill them, Krieg added. You will either kill them directly or indirectly in booby traps or in a firefight. That assessment is underscored by the accusations of Myra Sherman, the Israeli army, saying that the Israeli army killed her soldier's son who is being held in Gaza. The Israeli army claims it found the bodies of Ron Sherman and another Israeli prisoner of war in a resistance tunnel in Gaza last week. But Maya Sherman does not buy the official story that her son's cause of death could not be determined and accuses of the Israeli army of gassing him to death. Ron was indeed murdered, she asserted, not by Hamas. Think more in the direction of Auschwitz and the showers, but without Nazis and without Hamas, not by accidental fire, not by friendly fire, but premeditated murder, bombs with poison gas, she wrote in a Facebook post, which is really remarkable stuff, essentially saying that her son was held in this hostage, and what we've seen time and time again, especially throughout this war, was the use of the controversial Hannibal directive policy, which is, shoot at any, terrorist and ask if they potentially have Israeli hostages later, meaning after they're dead. And we've seen that used, according to some of the reports that are starting to trickle out now in Israeli media. We're starting to see that was used on October 7th. Definitely has been used in the past. And this would definitely be an example. There are Hamas people down there. There's a hostage down there. Who cares? Throw the poison gas anyway. So, despite 3 months of Israeli aerial carpet bombing and ground attacks, the Palestinian resistance maintains its command and control capabilities and continues to inflict punishing losses on the Israeli military. While there are clear indications of the large scale of the Israeli losses, much is shrouded by strict military censorship. But one thing, though, that did definitely get out was and it really was a remarkable moment, the 20 soldiers that were killed when they were trying to, just blow up a perfectly good building in Gaza that was not posing any threat to them. So they essentially say, what the heck? We got to blow it up. It's not fit for Palestinians to come back here and live. That won't do. So we got to blow it up to make sure they have nothing but rubble to return to whoever, resided in this building beforehand. So they line it up with a bunch of explosives, and they have a tank nearby. There's an anti-tank missile that Hamas sees what's going on here. They come over, they fire a tank or anti-tank missile at the building, or I think it was like at the tank, but then that triggered the building. I'm not entirely sure, but then the bombs that Israel put in the building blow up, but while they're still in it, the building falls on them and kills 20 people. And, I'm surprised they didn't post about it on TikTok afterwards. Like, it is just complete, not only is it they're not really having that much success because of the kind of guerrilla warfare of Hamas, it's just really amateur out there. It's a lot of reservists. It's a lot of people who don't have that much, experience fighting. It's a very low discipline army. This is not people who have trained really for a very long time. Very few of them have. And it's just, they didn't really anticipate that they would be in a situation where they would actually have to fight people who, despite being in one of the least resourced places on the face of the earth, are actually capable of mounting some kind of fight back. Which is a pretty major point there, which is really, really remarkable to see. And again, also kind of exposing the broader military plan of just destroying all the buildings in Gaza so that it makes it impossible, for the Palestinians to come back. While there are clear indications of the large scale of the Israeli losses, much is shrouded again by strict military censorship. With this, 20 killed, though, that got really right through. Meanwhile, Israel's only achievements are the killing and injuring of tens of thousands of Palestinian civilians in Gaza, the forced displacement of millions, and the destruction of homes, hospitals, schools, and other civilian infrastructure on a vast scale, exacting a horrifying toll. In another major story for the Israeli newspaper Yedioth Arnoth earlier this month, Israeli journalist Ronen Bergman, who also co-wrote the Times story, reveals the Israeli reveals the command for the Israeli forces to fire on their own civilians on October 7th came from the highest levels. The story corroborates mounting reports that Israel killed many, if not most, of its own people who died on the day Hamas led a large-scale resistance assault on the Israeli military bases and settler colonies across the boundary from Gaza. In recent weeks, splits between and among Israel's military and civilian leaders over the failure to achieve any of their stated objectives in the genocidal war on Gaza have spilled into the open and are reflected really widely in Israeli media. We saw that with the Netanyahu interruption of that meeting the other day, or the meeting of the interruption of the war cabinet meeting by the families of the hostages. But again, those same families of the hostages are starting to block the aid. They're essentially being pissed that the war is not being prosecuted effectively enough. But there's a general perception that Netanyahu has pretty much every instance in prolonging this war as much as possible to ensure his own political survival. The language of the tone of the Times article signaling Israeli military defeat is reminiscent of the indirect and progressive admissions of failure in the American-backed proxy war against Russia in Ukraine. It's worth reviewing how that played out. This is kind of Ali Abu Nima kind of laying this out here in Gaza. Or comparing, or not in Gaza, he's not obviously not in Gaza, but comparing Gaza to Ukraine here, and essentially, slowly but surely saying things are not going well. Ukrainian officers fear, and it's just like we've seen how that, really the United States have come to let the Ukrainian people down more than anything else with their inability to, to essentially just give them all this false hope, give them all this steam, so to speak. And then, essentially the moment Israel needed help, they're like, sorry, you're on your own, which was quite telling. But now, Biden may, as we talked about a few days ago, set out the migrants to get this done for Ukraine. But again, I think it's important to clarify with the, stuff regards to October 7th. It is still, very unclear how much of the, horrific civilian toll that took place on October 7th, especially the young children, was put on by this kind of a Hannibal directive, or, there was definitely civilians killed by Hamas, and a fair majority of them, I think it's fair to say, on October 7th, in what was, undeniably in any way, I think undeniably, killing civilians for any sort of political aim is an act of terror. But I think it's also very clear to see, and if you look at any really basic reports on Israeli media about this, there was witnesses who are both, in the kibbutzes at the time and members of the army who said, yeah, well, my superior kind of did tell me just to fire on this house. And I was like, maybe there's some hostages in there, but they were like, just do it. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. It's a crazy situation. So again, I think that's something we'll really only know for sure after the war, but is also definitely something to keep a very, very close eye on. But more broadly about this issue, it is important to see, and you do see the kind of panic starting to come over Israeli society. That's why they made another kind of peace offering here, for this, 2-month impromptu ceasefire, or up to 2-month ceasefire where they, if it's 2 months, if we feel like it, but then we'll definitely be starting again after 2 months. But if you look at, various comments by generals, by, a lot of former IDF people, really, you are starting, and a lot of former kind of intelligence and Mossad type people, you are starting to see that, they're getting the sense that things are not going exactly as well as they planned. Definitely a story to keep an eye on. For our last story today, though, I do want to get into this really incredible clip of put together by John Irvine of ITV, who is in Gaza, and who got some pretty incredible footage of this man being interviewed with a group about essentially how he was going to survive, how he was going to find food, whatever, trying to go get his cousin out of a building that had been bombed in North Gaza. When they had to evacuate, they were separated. Now he's going back for the cousin, and then moments after that interview, the cameras are still rolling. They're just panning away, and the interviewee the person being interviewed starts to walk down the street, And then, by the way, also waving a white flag. The other guys have the hands up. And then moments later, he shot with the sniper. And that was brought out. That was brought up in a State Department briefing today. Let's take a listen to that.
No, go ahead in the back. Yeah.
You may have had the chance to see some of the footage shot by our cameraman in the Gaza Strip, widely shared online, showing a group of men waving a white flag, representing no threat whatsoever, unarmed, and moving south to try and reach some relatives. The IDF opened fire, as you can see on that video, and killed one of them, Abu Salul. I wonder what your response to that is, and whether you think from watching that video whether that potentially represents a war crime.
I have seen that footage, but I am not going to comment on the specifics around that, given I'm not aware of the full circumstances on the ground. And as we've said before, this is not an American operation. But beyond that, please don't. I'm happy to take your questions if you'll allow me. To answer. I don't interrupt you, and I ask you to not do the same.
And it's just these like smug little twerps, especially in the State Department. They just get like, well, it's just like they have no comment. They don't even have like a pretend defense. Like, oh, we'll find out some of the circumstances on the ground. It's just another one of these. The constant mindset by the U.S. towards Israel is just like, just give us an excuse till we get these annoying people to shut up, and you can keep doing whatever you want. But we need an excuse. That's the only thing that we get. It's the only thing that we get for these. It's just disgusting, smug. Oh, this is not an American operation. So where the fuck are all the tax dollars of Americans going at this moment? Where did the ship that just landed in Israel filled with military equipment, where did that come from? Did it come from outer space? Did it come from Mars? Like, come on. It's absolutely, it's nonsensical. Anybody paying basic attention to this conflict does not believe, looks at this guy and just laugh. It's just laughable. The guy is there. He's getting it's really a heart-wrenching video to see. Not incredibly violent, but just absolutely heart-wrenching. And just incredibly enraging. And this weak, just disgusting, cowardly bullshit is that all that they have. It's just pathetic. It's pathetic on so many levels. All right. One to there for today. We'll be back on Friday.